Hello, welcome to Soul Sessions with Deborah and Rob.
We're back with our series, this time on perception.
Well, we're doing a whole series on mindset, and today is on the neuroscience of perception and reality.
I'm so excited about it, I've jumped the gun.
I know you jumped the gun. Yes, we are doing a whole series on just the mindset. We talk a lot about the deeper elements in Jungian theory and spiritual ideas of consciousness. We're going to talk a little bit about consciousness today. But we're going to really focus in on today on what are we actually perceiving how our brain works, how this neuroscience of the brain works in our perception of reality. And I love, when you talk about this stuff, because it's so fascinating of how we see the world and how we're not really seeing what's really there. And so I'd like to start off by, for me, asking you the question, the way a lot of people ask is, what's the difference between the brain and the mind? And then consciousness. Like there's this idea that these terms are used. Consciousness, a lot of people think it's my conscious experience, but that's not how we see that word. And then the mind, and then the brain. Because a lot of people even say, and I know I used to confuse it, interchanging. So let's define those, and then we'll go deeper.
Right.
So, what is the brain, Rob?
So, just to kind of give you an idea of where this information is coming from, my training is in neuropsychology. So, for you scientists out there, my perspective, of course, is neuroscientific, meaning, or neuropsychological, meaning in neuropsychology we assess, for example, the software of the mind and correlate it to what's going on in the brain. Like how does it connect to how the brain is functioning, how we see this, the mind aspect of reasoning, memory, sensory perception, all that, how it correlates to damage or lesions in the brain. So it's a useful perspective for assessment, for looking at what's going on in somebody that's having problems with memory or
social issues,
developmental issues also, and like autism or learning disabilities, anything like that. So, but that perspective then is augmented for us by the Eastern concepts of consciousness, which to our way of thinking are much more sophisticated than our Western concepts of consciousness. So we're in an interesting time where we have access to both this super high-tech information about the brain, how it functions, how it does its stuff, as well as this new, or not new, but I mean let's say the new interpretation of ancient wisdom traditions that have a long history of understanding consciousness in a direct way. So the combination of both, I think we need it. We need that combination of both. So we're not anti-science. We definitely embrace science because it gives us a way to proceed and to test knowledge and verify it. But we also know that we need that Eastern perspective, that wisdom, those wisdom traditions, so that we can take advantage of the work that people have done before us, instead of saying, well, everything in the past is null because it's the past and now is the only time that counts. That's crazy.
Well, the West doesn't create science the Western science is based on perception.
That too.
So it's a material world, versus the Eastern is saying the world it's a conscious universe versus a material universe. So,
that's right.
So from the scientist's point of view, consciousness arises from the brain, and our mind is creating. The brain is creating our mind, where the Eastern is that everything is consciousness, and then the brain and the mind emerge from that consciousness.
That's right.
So it's
so it's upside down.
Yeah,
basically.
it's upside down.
The East and the West are kind of mirror images of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't understand that, then you're throwing away half of the wisdom and knowledge that we have about consciousness, merely by saying, well, the only thing we can go by is by what we can verify physically through neuroscience. So anyway, some basic definitions about the difference between the brain and the mind. Let's start there. Excuse me. So the brain we know as the hardware that's in the skull. Some people call it the wetware because it's made out of neurons, and it's moist and wet, and is nurtured by blood and spinal fluid and all that good stuff. And that hardware we know is important for us in perception. If we simply think about vision, color vision, for example, we see the world in these beautiful colors. And if we simply ask, where are those colors? Do they exist in the actual objects, or is it a perceptual phenomena? And it's a perceptual phenomena, right? Which is interesting.
We think our senses are showing us something real and solid in the world, and it's exactly as we're looking at it. That's how things are.
Yeah.
But they know even in Western science that that's not the case.
Yes, and this would be based on just current neuroscience, basically understanding of how the senses work. So it sounds metaphysical, but it's actually based on the scientific method. Color does not exist in the world. It's a perceptual arising, meaning it arises in our experience. It's not in the world. So if I see, for example, that purple sphere you have over there on the desk, if I ask, where is that purple color? So it's not in the sphere itself. We know, for example, that the light bouncing off that sphere is entering my retina, the back of my eyeball.
So it's just light that's going into the retina.
And at a certain wavelength. And then my retina is capturing like a little image of...
Like the data?
Yeah, the information about that sphere and the light that is bouncing off of it. Then the neurons are firing that go back to the back of the skull, to the occipital lobe, where it's processed. Like it's like the central processing unit.
What are we seeing?
Yeah, what is this phenomena that I'm seeing? Then that experience of the shape and the color is what I experience.
You know, one thing you told me that totally blew my mind, and I think you said you taught this in a class once for your students. You took a boombox and you started playing music, and you say there is no music coming from that boombox. Yeah. And everyone was like, and that kind of blew my mind. The sound waves are going out of the boombox, going into our ears, which the perception of the tool of the ear, the instrument, is reading the vibration.
Right.
And then it's going into the brain, the hearing part of the brain, and telling us what we're hearing. So the music is in our mind, not in the box, which is so bizarre. So when we think about these simple things we know from modern science, Western science, that if that's the case with these simple things, what else are we not perceiving about the world and ourselves? Yeah. And so we assume the music is coming from, because it appears that way to us. We assume that is a certain color because it appears that way. And so we live our life based on that appearance of things, which is not really the true nature of things. And that's where the Eastern philosophy comes in, where they say like the appearance of things, don't be fooled by appearances.
Right. And let's answer this question. Why is this important to understand? Like,
yes.
why bother at all trying to figure out what is our perception doing and how is the mind working? Well, here for us, it's a very practical matter, because let's say you're in a desert and you only have a certain amount of time to find water, and you see a beautiful river in the distance with shimmering with the palm trees and birds flying around and all that stuff, but it's actually a mirage. If you don't understand that that's a mirage, you're going to be running and wasting your energy and perhaps dying on the way, trying to reach something that doesn't exist, but that appears very solid, very real, because of
your mind's creating this
the sensory experience of it. So if we don't understand,
when we're sick or something, we have these kind of hallucinations and things like that. When our body's not functioning properly, we can have hallucinations.
Well, just simply the
whole world is a hallucination, maybe.
Well, the way if we understand what does this imply about the way we experience our reality and how we define reality, and how we define knowledge and the things that we find interesting, all that is given to us through this understanding. In other words, it puts it in the right perspective. It gives us a true sense of what does it mean for me to enjoy something or experience that color purple. Where is it coming from? What is its true nature? So if we don't understand its true nature, we're kind of under a delusion.
We're chasing a mirage in our lives.
We're living in a type of mirage, and we're thinking that's reality. We're never questioning it. We're not even asking the question of ourselves when we're suffering, or when, like you said, when we're experiencing something out of the ordinary, like illness. We're not asking, what does this mean? And we're not seeing it in the right perspective. So this understanding is very important, both from East and West, because it gives us a true sense of reality.
So back to the brain and the mind.
Back to the brain.
The brain is the instrument that is using the senses to put together a piece of a conception of reality. And then the mind is the interpreter. Like the brain is is like the data collector, and then the mind is kind of like my sister does market research, so there's a lot of data. There's someone who collects the data, and the data itself doesn't have really. It's just kind of data, and then the researcher looks at the data and then makes assumptions over it. So it's kind of that's what happens with the mind. It makes up a story, and how it assigns yourself to that. You being the person that's experiencing or seeing that color, and then all the associations psychologically that go with that perception.
Right. So here's the where we start to get into the mind-body question, or the brain-mind question.
The hard problem?
Yeah. In psychology, they call it the hard problem of consciousness. But we're not to consciousness yet. We're simply talking about what is the physical brain and what is the mind. So that back to that color purple. If we open up the brain and we look for the color purple in there, we can't find it. Right? All we see in the brain are these neurons firing electrochemical signals at each other in patterns and rapidly firing in these patterns that correlate to when I'm looking at that sphere and experiencing the color purple, but we can't see it in the physical brain. So we see the brain as the hardware, right? It's the processing unit that is creating those firings and those patterns. But the question still remains, where is the color purple then? It is that experience of qualia, or the mind, where it exists, that I experience it as a real experience.
There was something experiencing that color.
That's right. That it exists, but it exists in mind as an experience, because we can't find it anywhere else. We can't find it in the let's say in the atoms and molecules of that sphere, nor in the brain.
So it's kind of like love. Like when you see you're in a relationship, you can't really find the love in someone. Like you cut someone's brain open and you say, where's the love that person's emanating, or where's the love inside of me, or my heartbreak, or any kind of emotion. It's really an experience that you really can't find in the brain. The brain is processing it, but the experience itself is in the mind.
Yes.
So, and I know I talked about this before, a lot of the, when I did a lot of pain management, when I was a hypnotherapist, the pain is really a perception. So the pain is an experience. It's not an actual thing in the body. The body reacts, but the mind actually creates this story about how intense it is, and the perception of that pain depends on a person. Depends on that. It's an experience, not a thing. Like if it was an actual solid thing, everyone would experience that stimulus the same way.
Yeah. I was talking yesterday to someone about they had worked with people with phantom limbs.
Oh yeah.
So the phantom limb phenomena is interesting because it shows kind of the interlocking way brain and mind operate. So the phantom limb phenomena is simply this: let's say a person suffers an accident, a car accident, and they lose their right arm. For some reason, the brain never gets the memo, and
it's still processing as if the arm is still there.
That's right, because the neurons that were operating that right arm are still there, then they're intact, and they're still firing as if the person had that right arm there.
So and when people put on those now they have those new what do they call this? The fake arms. I'm trying to think of the
prosthetic.
The prosthetic. It actually connects to the brain, and they can move it because the brain is still able to move the fingers. And
well, I think they're going off the firing of the muscle,
but it still goes up to the brain.
Yeah, of course, it's connected still. Yeah.
So it's like going back. It's like filling in. So if it wasn't there in the brain, it wouldn't send the signal out. So that's interesting.
Right. So here's the phenomena that some of those patients report pain in their right arm when they don't have a right arm.
Yeah.
So you see there that the experience of pain, the experience of color, the experience of sound, like you're saying, the music, the meaning that we feel is so real to us. It's a mental experience. Now, and again, this is not metaphysics. This is from neuroscience, just basic neuroscience. You'll find this in any neuroscience textbook, basically. Everything we experience that we think is out there is reconstructed for us through our brain mind, and we feel it. We feel that we're walking onto a stage in a room, and we're interacting with other people that are separate from us. But in reality, it's all happening in the mind.
Like a virtual reality.
Very much like a...
But there is, well, I guess we don't know if there's actually something out here, but all we know is what we perceive and sense through our five senses. So there is a phenomenon, but we don't know. But we're in that soup of it. I don't want to go that deep.
Well,
okay.
This is kind of what philosophy gets to is, okay, if this is true, right? If this is kind of the way we're experiencing the world, what does that mean for us?
Everything is a delusion, basically. Or it's not as real as we think it is. Like in Vedanta, they call it, or the Upanishads, the apparent reality versus the true reality.
That's right.
So we're seeing an apparent reality. And I remember one of your talks when we were training our coaches at one of our events. You said, we're just changing, we're like most people out there trying to change one apparent reality for another. And we're just kind of playing around like one mirage for another mirage. And if we understand the true nature of reality, we can actually have a different experience. I mean, really, it's all about how do we experience our life in a new, more meaningful way versus just go off our perception.
Yeah. So now the question of consciousness then in the West, this is kind of where they get stuck, because they say the brain must hold the key to finding consciousness. But if we can't even find the color purple in the brain, how are we going to find consciousness in there? It's kind of a dead end for the West. That's why they call it the hard problem of consciousness, because it seems intractable. Basically, we can't find a way to proceed if we're looking just for the brain to be the source of consciousness. So this is where the Eastern understanding of consciousness comes in, and we can definitely see it as a philosophy. That's okay, and we can say, well, it's a hypothesis. Let's say it's a possibility. We're not buying into it. We're just
testing out the
we're
hypothesis.
saying maybe this is possible. So what they're saying is this: they're saying you will never find consciousness in the brain, because the brain is part of the physical body. In essence, it's like made out of what we call the gross material universe, and you are not your individual mind. Your individual mind, excuse me, is reflecting the pure awareness that exists in the universe. And or let's put it another way. They would say the physical universe, the way we see it and perceive it, is arising from consciousness, not the other way around. In other words,
so we're not like that whole I create my life. We're not creating consciousness. We're a part of consciousness. Like it's the consciousness is the creator.
Yeah.
And we're basically observers of the consciousness.
So the only way we can talk about these things is through metaphor. So here's a beautiful metaphor that I heard of.
I like that beautiful metaphor.
Yeah. If you think about the sun.
Okay.
Beautiful sunny day. And there are these jars of water filled with water outside. Now, if you go up to the jars and look in each one of them, and they're filled up to the top with water, you will see the sun reflected in each one of those. The metaphor is that sun, that source of light, is the pure awareness of the universe. The individual jars are us, our individual minds, reflecting the pure awareness, the pure consciousness.
But we think we're the jar and we're the water and limited by that, versus that we're the sun. We're just like, or the flat, concept of the sun, like the reflections, like seems flat and but we don't, and most people don't even see the reflection. They just think they're the jar of water.
Right. So it would be like looking for the sun in that little reflected sun.
Like looking for consciousness in you.
Yes. And trying to find it in the individual brain, which is, kind of chasing that mirage.
So one of the other things that, so the function of perception really is for us to, our brain to give us a sense of the world and to say, what is this object made of? And what does it mean to me? And then the mind interprets, like if you see a delicious, let's say lemonade, that could be very delicious and your experience of it would be wonderful because you love lemonade. But if you hate lemons, that's like, ugh, like it's a different experience. But so the perception is noticing the object and then the mind is creating meaning around it. And from memory and from all the other experiences. And then having your own, I don't like lemonade, like the I arising out of that mind. Yeah. Individual mind.
Yeah, this is a good distinction between, say, the East and the West. In the West, we saw the objects of the world and we asked, what is that object made out of? Like the focus was on trying to figure out what are the objects made out of. That's physics, basically. And physics is considered like the hard science, like the true science in Western science is considered physics. Like, if you're a physicist, then like you're the high priest of science. You got it going on, right? Because you're investigating material, matter. And matter is considered to be the foundation of reality. In the East, as soon as they turn the spotlight at the observer, they started to realize, wait a minute, the object doesn't really exist without the observer. The object is only appearing in mind, and therefore it's really an observer that we're talking about when we look at an object. Very different perspective.
Well, another perspective, and I don't know if this is a good metaphor, because you really need metaphors for this, is I've heard in the East they talk about a piece of clay. You look at that piece of clay and it's a piece of clay, but then when they make it a pot, because it has a hole in it and open it, and it's shaped a certain way, the shape of the clay changes, then we call it a pot. And then it has a new meaning, a new concept.
Yeah.
But it's the same material. It's just now you don't say, oh, there's that clay. You say there's a pot. So we're starting the mind creates name and form around those things.
That's right. And it does so to give us like a harmonious, coherent experience of reality, because otherwise the universe would be very chaotic for us.
And like we don't know what to call anything and what to do with anything, and if something's going to hurt us or not in our body, we learn how to adapt. And
I did early work on language and language acquisition. We know that language helps us structure our reality. It gives name to the things and meaning, right? Through naming an object and an experience, we can put it to rest, right? We can relax around it. Whereas when we don't have a name for something, it makes us anxious, confused, right? We're not sure how to deal with it.
It's kind of like when you hear a weird sound and you're going, there's this weird sound going on, what is that? But then when you identify it, you give it name and form, it feels like, okay, I can identify that.
Yeah.
And so it's a way for us to feel comfortable in this physical environment. But I think the differences between East and West is that in the West, we want to know what the object is made of. And the East says, we're turning it around and saying, what are we made of? What is this consciousness? What is this experience made of? Versus what is inside that object as a material. So we really have to look at not what we're perceiving, but who is the perceiver.
That's right. Because without the perceiver, there is no universe. Literally, it doesn't exist. That the way the universe comes into being, the way it's birthed, is through the perceiver. But the question in the East is, who is the real perceiver? If we, let's say individually, we're only reflecting the pure awareness, then it goes back by simple logic that we are the pure awareness. That's who we really are. That's the true perceiver in this whole scheme of things. Brain, mind, consciousness. We are consciousness. The brain and the mind are arising out of that pure awareness.
So let's go back to something more kind of grounded and practical to apply this.
This is not practical.
So we know we have this hardware, the brain or the wetware, that's taking in the data. We have the mind that creates the individual experience of that data, and consciousness, which is everything arises from. So we are that consciousness, and then an individual jar, the little jar reflective of that consciousness, and then our individual experience creates the world. And so we have the same instruments as human beings. So we perceive on a data-only standpoint a lot of the same data. But really our mind will see that data differently, and will see it and perceive it differently. And then sometimes the mind tricks the data, so the perception, so you're actually not seeing things as they really are. And one of the they did an experiment where your group tells you what to believe and what to think. So there was they brought these people in. Half of them were the subjects, and half of them were like plants in there for the experiment. And they had draw two lines on the board, and one line was very obviously longer than the other. And so the people they planted in there were all saying that the shorter one was longer. And then maybe the handful of subjects they had in there tended to go with the group, even though their perception and their mind is seeing that, no, the other one on the right is longer, but everyone else is seeing something different. So we end up changing our perception based on what other people assume is there. And so if we think about this in relationships, a simple example would be your perception of a person can change because you're taking in data, this person's speaking a certain way, but then all your friends say, isn't Becky a jerk? You know, she's always complaining, she's always this way. And then all of a sudden your perception of that person changes. So is she really a jerk, or is your perception of that person? And then your brain will select, based on that assumption, will select qualities in that person that confirm that confirmation bias that will confirm, and your perception will feed back. So it's almost like you're not really seeing a person for who they are. Even you're seeing what you assume the intake is, and then the mind mixed with it, and the data gets interpreted. Just like I told you, my sister, the researcher, sees the data and says, this is what this means. Yeah. And so if we think about what's the impact of that, is that what we see in the world is just a narrow sliver of what we're possibly, like the possible universes that we could be in. And we tend to just gravitate by default to the same perception, like the same paycheck, the same type of relationships, the same type of world problems that we see everywhere. You know, like there's always this kind of perception that we're making this assumption that it's always that way, or it can't change, or I can't change. There's limitation. I mean,
that's where you see the implications of understanding these phenomena. They come into play in a very practical way. Because we're not talking about some metaphysical, transcendental experience. We're talking about the way we experience our everyday life.
There's numinous quality of our life. It's so magical already.
Yes, how we experience each other, how we interchange emotions and kind of pick up on each other's thoughts. Because again, we're reflecting the pure awareness, and so we're all connected in that sense. That we're each reflecting that pure awareness, but then we over-identify with our own limited mind, because from our own limited mind, we're seeing everything from that vantage point.
It's like collapsing in. You know, it's another good metaphor for this is one thing you told me about neuroscience. Rob, you're so smart with all this stuff, that when we're looking at anything, our mind is only able to focus on our thumbnail size of really high focused. Yeah. Everything else is blur. So when we walk into a room, or I'm looking at you, I'm like looking at very small percentage, and the brain and the mind is filling in the brain's filling in all the other data and just kind of assuming.
It creates the illusion.
It's so fascinating.
Yeah, it creates the illusion of this complete picture that we're walking onto a stage and everything is clear, when in reality, the only thing that we see clearly is a small little sliver of the visual field.
So the visual field, what you're saying, is very, very narrow. And so imagine that we are looking at the world. I mean, this blew my mind, is that we're creating all our assumptions in the world based on a thumbprint of our focused attention. And so if our visual perception is that limited, I would think that other senses are that limited too, where everything we see is in a very small, tiny sliver of perception.
Yes, and we know it's the way the brain mind creates that reality is based on past experiences. It operates on the principle of let's conserve as much energy as possible. If you walk into the same room that you walked in yesterday,
you're seeing a memory, right? Is that what it is? You're not really seeing the thing Let's say you're seeing a memory, or it's...
Yeah, because it says, why bother reanalyzing everything when you did it yesterday?
You have the data.
Yeah, you have the information already, and let's just fill it in. So most of it is blank, and the brain just fills in the blanks with past experiences.
It's so fascinating. So when you're seeing, like I'm seeing this curtain over here, that I'm really seeing a memory of that curtain from my mind.
Most of it, I would say.
Yeah. It's
except for the pieces that you focus on. Yeah, if you zero in on changes or alterations, then you're kind of in the moment, right? You're seeing the moment, but the rest of it is constructed from past experiences.
So let's talk more about the implications of this. Is that so basically we're creating our own experience of life. Like they always say, recreate your life. You're creating that experience. You're creating the perception of that experience. So there's the data, and then the perception of that data. And so that perception, and so instead of changing your thoughts, you have to change your perception. And it's not only changing what you're seeing out there, but you're changing the perception of yourself. Like, who is experiencing this? Is it the ego? Is this little person in this body? Or is it the pure awareness, the pure consciousness that's having an experience being human? And then the way whoever's deciding who the perceiver is, you're going to see a different reality, right?
Absolutely. It has very clear implications for dealing with powerful emotions, which is, let's say, in the mental health field, or in coaching, or in any helping profession, we spend a lot of time talking about emotions and thoughts and behaviors. Very clear implications for how we address and approach those experiences. Because if we say, oh, you're not your individual mind, you're the pure awareness cannot be damaged by any experience. It cannot be damaged by any powerful emotion, no matter how negative, because the individual mind is essentially more like an instrument. It's perceiving, like we were talking about, it's perceiving and constructing its reality based on its individual perception. But the pure awareness is unmoved and unchanging, is untainted by any of the experiences. In other words, you can have the best possible experience or the worst possible experience of your life, and the pure awareness is still pure.
Well, let's talk about that, because there's a question here about over-identifying with the limited mind. Are you referring to with the ego, and what does the mind refer to? So there's two parts of our conscious mind. There's the ego mind, which is that identification with the I, and then there's the divine intellect, which is the pure awareness that is always present with this. It's the part of us that's aware that we're aware, and that is the real. So they're both mind, but one is more closer to the pure awareness of who we are, but we're having an individual, like the sun in the jar kind of thing, that divine intellect, but that is untouched, unchanged by the world. It's just witnessing it. So, and then the ego mind is perceiving that kind of based on our past experiences, our conditioning, our template, and that ego is. Really based on survival. It covers our mind, and we're not even aware of the witness. Even though it's there, we don't even pay attention to it. So to really change your perception and change your life, you just don't need to reprogram your ego. You need to realize you're not the ego, and then that makes everything change. And for me, I spent so many years, especially as a hypnotherapist, trying to reprogram the negative thoughts to positive and be more confident. And you're just building up the ego, which is better than thinking negative, but it's still not going to give you freedom. You're still caught up in, I'm a limited person in this body and I need these external objects. But when we come from that awareness, we start to see that we're connected to everything. And that what we're seeing is not really, we kind of start questioning what we're seeing instead of falling into that assumption of that's real, that person's this way, this situation is this way. We start to kind of become this idea of self-awareness. That's what that is. You're aware of the self with the big S, of the true self.
Yeah. And the concept of meta-awareness is useful here. So when we are in our ordinary ego awareness, we believe we are the body, the individual mind in essence, right? I am this individual mind in this individual body, and we identify with it. Now, what we know about consciousness is when we identify with something, our mind is filled with it. It's like the filter that we filter experience through. So when I identify as my individual mind, the consciousness of the universe will appear to me to reflect that.
Like we were saying, that if we think we're the jar, we think we're just this little puddle. We have this barrier. There's only a certain place we can be.
Yeah.
We can't like shine in the sky. We're just like limited to this small little experience.
That's right.
But when we see ourselves as the sun, then we can look down at ourselves and see other possibilities.
Yeah, so if you notice in a lot of Eastern spiritual traditions, the emphasis is on meditation, because meditation, what it does, it allows us to access that meta-awareness, where we're observing our thoughts, we're observing our own mind.
Isn't that what meditation is about, like that practice? It's not like stopping the thought, it's being the witness to it and just noticing that you're not the thought.
Yes, that because if we ask who is the one that is observing my thoughts, so there's that meta-awareness element. And that's who we really are. But it takes a little bit of practice, because we're conditioned to believe, again, we just assume, of course I am this individual mind. Of course I am. I don't even question it. It's just like self-evident.
I'm having an experience of being me. It has to be true. And it is true. You can't deny that experience.
It's true at that level.
But the way I'm experiencing it.
Yes, but the nature of that experience is very different.
Yeah.
It is essentially arising out of that pure awareness, a pure consciousness, and that's who you really are. That's the true observer, the true experiencer in every situation.
And last week we talked about the imagination and how like this mind can imagine like things that we're not even perceiving in our physical world, or we're taking what we like a limitation or something slowing us down, and then our mind says, see, this isn't working out, and then we kind of have this imagination of the worst case scenario and all these things that basically then out there the perception reflects back. So let's say you're a coach and you're trying to get some clients, and you're kind of feeling like a couple people have said they're not interested or they can't afford it, or not showing up, or no one's responding. You're thinking no one wants my work, and then all of a sudden it snowballs into everything out there you do isn't working, and then you start kind of imagining that maybe I shouldn't do this, and then your experience of what you has been tainted by your misperception, because you're only basing that assumption on a couple people instead of the whole realm. And the same thing I see with relationships. When I used to do a lot of relationship coaching, a lot of the women would say, I'd go online and there's no one out there. I've been on Match. There's no one. There's no good guys on there. Oh, really? And why? Because I went on and I saw some people and I was like, nope, and online dating isn't for me. And so that will confirm your reality, and then your perception will start to just basically coalesce around that assumption. And then and then if you have a different perspective where you say, you know what, that right person is going to be out there, I'm going to keep going, you will find that person, because your mind can direct what you perceive versus just taking the default perception and letting the ego decide based on past experience what to expect. So what we're really trying to do is change the perceiver, and then you can change what's being perceived.
Yeah, and it's, let's say, I would say that it's not that intentional, because we are already that true pure awareness. So in essence, we don't have to acquire anything. It's really more that we just need to understand what is it that I'm perceiving, and the pure awareness is already there. There's nothing else that you can be, right? The only other thing that you can be is you're caught up in the delusion, right? You're thinking the mirage is real. That's the only other state of mind there is. So as soon as you start to calm the mind and ask the question, what is it that I'm experiencing? The pure awareness is already there.
Yeah.
You're falling into it, basically. So you don't have to exert yourself to create something new.
Like your true self is right there.
Yeah,
it's like hanging out with you.
Yeah.
Now, there's another question about the detachment. When we talk about meta-awareness, we're not detaching. We're actually feeling everything and experience everything in life. We're just also having this added attention to our watching ourselves go through it. So when we're feeling an intense emotion, we don't want to like disconnect. I mean, a lot of people do that as a defense. If they've learned to do that, is to kind of disassociate. Meta awareness is not disassociating, but basically having this experience and this experience at the same time. And it's in the Upanishads. I always use this quote, but it's the perfect one. It's that there's two birds sitting in the tree. One bird is eating the sweet and sour fruits of life, while the other bird is watching, non-attached. And so it's not detached. It's watching and experiencing the trees having both of you. You know, it's having that delicious human experience, love and heartbreak, and celebrating like adventure, and like we want to have that life. But we also want to understand the nature of what we're experiencing. And that's actually makes us love life more than always just trying to get to the ego is always trying to just move us to pleasure. And when we don't have that perfect life all set out for us, which no one ever does, we feel unsatisfied. And then we're caught up in that chasing the mirage. We're like, oh, that's interesting. I'm having this experience. We can still feel it, but we're perceiving it differently and ourselves differently having that experience. Does that make sense? Do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's the definition of suffering, that we're expecting the physical appearance of things to give us happiness, and they can't, because it's always changing. If you notice, and this is verifiable by simple observation, just observe the external world for a minute, and it's continuously changing. And the next moment, it's something different.
Yeah.
And therefore, if we expect it to give us a constant, we're going to be dissatisfied. We're going to suffer. We're going to feel like there's no ground for us to rest on. The only ground that there is that pure awareness. That's why that pure awareness is described as happiness, bliss. This really the absolute reality that we can rest on. That we can say, this is my rock. This is my solid ground. When you understand that the reality of any experience is you. It's your perception of it, not in the external changing appearance of things.
So the question is about strong experience like pain, emotional experience. Is it the same as real pain? And yes, they've actually done research that the perception of an emotional is held in the body, but emotional pain is perception as well. A lot of people think you should feel this way, you should feel that way. This terrible thing happened. Of course, it's because that thing happened. That's why I have pain. It's not actually the thing that happened. It's my perception of what happened that created the pain. Because we know that like I worked in childbirth, some women go through the childbirth with the same exact register of pain, like the body measurements. One woman has a different perception of pain than another person. And it's the same thing with emotions. It's some people, their emotional pain is a perception of a story of how bad things are, and we can magnify it and we can shrink it, just like physical pain in the body.
Well, yeah, but we have to remember, what is it that we mean by physical pain?
Yeah.
the way it exists is again like a mental phenomenon.
Yeah. So
there is no distinction between the physical pain and the perceptual pain. The perceptual pain is simply the way we're interpreting the experience.
Just like emotions too, we feel this kind of sadness or anger or panic or fear. It's a perception.
It's a perception, and the illusion is
because there has to be something, a story of why that pain is there.
Yes.
We don't just have these spontaneous, emotions. Like there's a story and a kind of objects out there and perception that's creating that.
Well, with emotion, it's very simple.
Yeah.
We think that person made me angry.
Yeah.
No one can make you angry, right?
Or that event made me.
Yeah, or that event made me sad or experience this thing. No one makes us, and nothing makes us feel those experiences. Those experiences are arising from within the mind.
Just like I said, love. No one can make you feel love for them, or you can't make someone love you.
That's right.
As Bonnie Raitt used to sing.
But we live and we act as if those external events are the reality, and then we're just responding to them, which is that's false.
And we
we
always have the power to respond to things. And again, we can respond by disassociating because it's too painful, but we're still caught up in the ego's perception of that pain. And then we say, I have this pain, I had this experience, and we carry it with us, and it becomes a limitation because we think we're helpless toward it. And I know a lot of people, when we work with emotions, especially intense emotions, a lot of people are so afraid to go toward them because they think they're going to get stuck there. And almost like the emotion can take over. And if we're in ego, the emotion will run our life. Our emotional responses will run our life.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're not dismissing the emotions as powerful. We know they're very powerful, but the power comes from us.
Yes.
We're the ones that say, yes, that emotion is so strong that it might overwhelm me or damage me somehow. If we ascribe that meaning to that emotion, then it does have the power. We're giving it the power to do that to us. But if we understand the true nature of it, that, it's part of the individual experience of mind, but I'm not the mind. I am the observer of that mind. I am the pure awareness. And the pure awareness cannot be damaged by any emotion, any experience. It's always immortal, pure, just that it's always constant. Then we're not afraid of the emotions.
So we talk about the burden of being aware and conscious. And life is, the Buddhists say life is suffering. It's because we have this mind that creates suffering all the time. It makes us feel that we're not enough, that we need to, survive. There's danger out there. Things aren't, when things aren't perfect, something's wrong and I got to fix it. And we're basically chasing this life. And then before we know it, 100 years or 90 years go by, and it's, what have we accomplished? Is just having a lot of experience of suffering and not suffering, suffering, not suffering. And we can actually be free of it by understanding these concepts and understanding, the neuroscience of perception makes us start to that's why I love this conversation, because it makes us say, okay, well, this is science here we're talking about, that there's no music coming out of that speaker. It's my mind is hearing the music based on a vibration, of a sound vibration.
Very much so. And it does require a little bit of retraining.
Yeah.
If you notice, all the spiritual disciplines or mind-body disciplines emphasize the need for a method of retraining your mind.
Not just reading a book and meditating.
And it makes sense because, let's say, evolution set us up to perceive the world this way because it works. It helps us survive and navigate the social world and all this stuff. But if we really want to transcend that and to experience the deeper meaning of life and take the reins of our own mind, then it requires that retraining, right? That self-inquiry. Now, in the West, psychology actually started off on the right foot. They were in the early 1900s, they were using introspection, meaning, okay, they said, if we're going to study the mind, well, let's have people look at their mind. What is going on with their thoughts? Very much like the Eastern way of meditating.
Like they did the test with the skin galvanization, Galvin. I don't know the word, where you say a word in associations and things like that.
Yes, but they were using that introspection, meaning they were having people look at their own thoughts and emotions and reporting on them as a way of studying the mind. But then they got insecure and they started to think that's not a true science, because the report that the individual is giving us is subjective. And we can't measure it, right? How can we measure their happiness or their sadness or anything like that? So they dropped it, and they went to this pure
behavior. I can measure how they work and how they move and
physical brain, that kind of stuff.
So we lost that.
We lost that momentum.
Thank God there's Jungian theory out there that we can.
Jung was one of the few that kind of kept that tradition going, and of course he was very much influenced by Eastern philosophy, and we still have the Eastern philosophy, so it balances out what we're learning from neuroscience in the West to have that wisdom tradition of consciousness.
So the retraining process, I wouldn't call it retraining because we haven't even done it.
Or deconditioning.
Deconditioning. It's really individuation. And what Jung says is that, if you don't know who you are, the world will ask you who you are. If you don't know, the world will tell you. And we end up getting formed our perceptions and our mind by the ego early in life, which is a natural process, natural part of being human. But around midlife, we're called to say there's more to us. We feel like the things that we used to keep us safe and survive and practical aren't really satisfying or fulfilling anymore. The jobs or the relationships that we've attracted and created in our life, there's a calling for our higher nature to come in. And so individuation isn't about reprogramming the ego or retraining the ego. It's about basically individuating from it. It's like becoming your true self. Like, who am I with this divine intellect, this individual mirror of consciousness? Who can I become in the world that's not based on my past? How can I create fresh? And it's a process. I mean, Jung had laid out the process and the method, and it's individuation, which you first have to understand that you are the ego and what is your persona. He works with the shadow side that's unconscious, and then you go deeper into your personal unconscious, and then we could connect to the collective unconscious, where we start to connect to our real self and see ourselves. So it's a process.
Through 2,000 years of philosophy there.
Yeah, but the three ways we do it is with coaching. You can't do it alone. You're coaching on shadow work, visualization. You're going to use your mind to imagine in symbols, and you're going to get information from the unconscious. And then your dreams, looking at your dreams will show you basically parts of yourself that you can't perceive in the waking world, and it's actually giving you a glimpse of a bigger part of yourself. And as you start seeing this other aspect of yourself, it's basically natural for you to start being more of a witness, being more of an observer, being more of a curiosity around life instead of just reacting from ego. And so it is a process, but it's a beautiful journey. It's what Jung called individuation.
I think it's a way of reclaiming our humanity, of just kind of really asking, what is the purpose of being in this body? Am I here just to suffer, or just to work, or just to procreate? Is there a deeper connection that we can find somehow? And the Eastern philosophy and Jungian psychology gives us that method.
Yeah,
right?
It's like the East-West, the deeper philosophy, but also understanding our personal psychology and what makes us, our individual ego tick, and how that is really affecting our perception of what's real. It's like, oh, I'm triggered by this person because of something in my shadow that's that perception. Our perception gets changed. And what I find is really interesting is that once you even just do the first level, which is the shadow work, you start to, your perception of people change. Like someone who used to, like on your family, who used to trigger you, as you change your perception of yourself and the relation to that, because it's always you and an object, and those people out there are objects, you change the perceiver, the object out there changes. Like if you see yourself as an unlimited true self, you're going to see the objects in the world much differently than if you see it from the ego's perspective.
Yeah.
But it's a great journey. But thank you for all your questions.
Can I just answer or try to answer one of these? So she's saying ultimately then is physical pain an illusion? Yeah, that's a good question. In addressing that, I say in approaching that question, we have to drop this idea that there is a split, that there is a difference between physical pain and something else, like an illusion. Because remember, what we're saying is that the body itself is arising in consciousness, meaning it's already a mental experience that we're having of the body. It doesn't exist anywhere else, and that's a hard concept to grasp, because we're so used to thinking, oh, there's a physical reality and then there's a mental reality separate from it. But the only way we experience the physical reality, or what we call the physical reality, is as a mental experience. So we're always talking about mental experiences. So is it an illusion? Pain is
a perception, I would say.
Pain is an experience. We definitely experience it. So as an experience, it is real. We're not negating that. The only question is, then if it exists as an experience, what is the nature of that experience? And its nature, again, goes back to consciousness, awareness. It exists as an experience to us, and that's what we call reality. And that's the only way it exists for us.
Well, the way I used to do childbirth hypnosis back in my early days, and they would show if you look at like the contractions, if you've ever had a kid or watched someone have children, the contractions go up and then they go down. And what they said is that the woman on the upswing of the pain, their perception of pain, like right at the bottom, like when the pain was starting to build, that was more painful than the top of it when it was coming down, because as the pain was decreasing, the perception of that pain was less than when she should have been feeling even more pain. But the fact that it was decreasing gave us a different perception. And so I've done a lot of work with pain management, and it's really interesting. We have a pain dial that I use with my clients, and they have a headache and you just turn the dial down, and it's like, oh, like my mind can actually direct the perception of pain in my body. So it's really, really powerful that you can have a default like kind of response to a stimulus, and your ego will like perceive it the way it's always perceived it, but you can actually change that perception. And so I've had people give childbirth to 8-pound babies without any medication, and then you see other people that are like, give me every drug you have, because the environment of the hospital creates this perception of worry and anxiety and stress, and we know that stress increases pain. So there's all these other factors besides just the stimulus of putting something hot in your hand. And think about everything in life, not only just physical pain, but stress and emotion. It's all perception. It's our experience of the world that's creating that kind of stimulus in the body.
Yeah, I think that's what I mean by retraining our mind is that we're so used to thinking of, no, there must be like a physical reality out there somewhere. And just objective. Yeah, and having to drop that idea and to think in terms of the mind. Everything is occurring within the mind, and that everything that we think exists it exists. Yeah, it exists, but it exists as a mental experience, nowhere else. That's a hard concept for us to kind of wrap our mind around.
Well, a great metaphor, and I know we have to go, but another metaphor is, think about a dream. We have a dream where we have this perception of this world that has buildings and people you know, and you're going on elevators and climbing stairs and on water and underwater, and it feels so real in the moment. And then you wake up and it's like, wait a minute, that was not real, but it was an experience. You had an experience. You can't deny that experience of the dream, but where did that dream happen? It happened in our mind. So it's just really, really mind-blowing when you keep asking the questions. But anyway, thank you for joining us. We are going to be here next week with another episode of our Mindset series. Hope you enjoyed today.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching.
Great questions. Appreciate it.
And we'll see you soon. Take care.
Stay well.
Bye-bye.